to spell. Inovsky. See, Borodowski. There we go. There'll be a quiz. I see someone's taking notes. I hope you take notes on that. So I was born as Alina Adams in the city of Odessa. And for the first 7 years of my life, I lived in a single room with my parents in what was called a communal apartment. A communal apartment in the Soviet Union was an apartment that previously had been for one family, but then it was chopped up so that multiple families were forced to live together. And I use the word forced because it wasn't a roommate situation. It wasn't like, oh, hey, we're friends, do you want to share an apartment? It was the government assigned you to live with however many people the government thought you should be living with. So my parents and we lived in one room of what had probably been the apartment's dining room. And then there was another family, a couple, and their daughter who lived in what had been the apartment's bedroom. And then they had an elderly mother who lived almost like in a pantry, some things where you can open and close the door. We shared a kitchen, we shared a bathroom. And my parents were actually very lucky in that they got along well with the people they'd been assigned to live with. A lot of people weren't that lucky. And so, for instance, because people had to share a kitchen, you might put your food to cook on the stove, come back, find out that your neighbors had dumped it in the sink so they could put their own food on. Or you might be drying your laundry, on a line across the kitchen, leave the room, come back, find out they took your sheets and threw them out the window. So also sharing a bathroom. So this is a story that I like to tell people. So because people were forced to live together because they didn't like each other, because they didn't trust each other, when people went to the bathroom, not only did they bring their own toilet paper, they brought their own toilet seat, because that was the level to which people didn't trust the people they were living with. So you would see people in line, like it was like my grandparents lived in a large apartment where it was 10 rooms. So it was 10 different families, one bathroom, and everybody standing in line in the morning to go to use the bathroom, holding their toilet seats under one arm, because that was the level of it. So in 1976, my parents decided to leave the Soviet Union. Now, here was the situation with leaving the Soviet Union in the 1970s. The Soviet Union was a workers' paradise that nobody would ever want to leave. But just to make sure that nobody wanted to leave, they made it illegal to leave. So what happened in 1976? In 1976, a pair of American senators, a Senator Jackson and a Senator Vanik, created what was known as the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. And what the Jackson-Vanik Amendment did was it tied the export of wheat from the United States to the Soviet Union. Now, in its heyday, Ukraine had been considered the breadbasket of Europe. They grew enough wheat in Ukraine to feed all of Europe. After about 50 years of Soviet rule, they had mismanaged it to the point where they now had to import wheat from the United States. So they tied the export of wheat from the United States to the Soviet Union to the Soviet Union allowing various persecuted minorities to leave, which included Jews, it included Jehovah's Witnesses, it included Baptists, it included some ethnic groups from the more eastern area, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So basically, I like to say I was traded for wheat. I am here today because the Soviet Union needed wheat. So here is a problem, though, that the Soviet Union had. The Soviet Union was a workers' paradise that nobody would ever want to leave. So why were suddenly thousands of people applying for permission to immigrate? The Soviet Union said, we got this. It's not because the people object to communism as a concept. It's not due to the shortages of food. It's not due to the living conditions. It's not due to persecution with literally hundreds of thousands of people disappearing off the streets. No. It's not because of that. People want to leave the country for the purpose of family reunification. That means that people were leaving behind their parents, their siblings, sometimes even spouses and children, if you couldn't get paperwork for them, to reunite with a second cousin that they'd never met in America. But that was the reason, and that was the official reason why we were allowed to leave. Now, we couldn't just get on a plane and come to America. It's a much more complicated process than that. We went through various countries. We went through Poland, we went through Austria, we went through Rome, because those were all places where you had to stop along the way and ask the American government for permission to immigrate. In fact, we stopped in Vienna, and then in order to get to Rome, we had to get on a bus with 1-day visitor visas. And then we just forgot to come back from Rome once we went on our visit. So we stayed in Rome for about 4 months. And by the way, if you are a child, especially if you're a Soviet child and you have no idea what Christmas is, Rome is the most exciting place in December because there are baby dolls in a box on every corner. I had absolutely no idea what it meant. Everywhere I went in Rome, there was this thing, it's called a manger, I learned much later. And that baby doll is not a doll to play with. That's something that I learned as well. But if you're going to learn about Christmas, December in Rome is the place to do it. So after we left Rome, we came to New York, where we were just there for 1 day because we were actually going to San Francisco. And to give you an idea, when we were in Rome, you need to get someone to sponsor you in the United States in order to come. And one of the things that the sponsoring organizations look for is what your profession is, because then they can see if you can find work in the place where you're going. And so because my father was a biochemist, we had offers to go to New Jersey and we had offers to go to San Francisco. And since both of them meant nothing to us, my father went to one of the American volunteers and he asked them, so I have this offer for New Jersey and I have this offer from San Francisco, which one should I pick? And the person said, you have an offer from San Francisco and you're even considering New Jersey? Now, no insult to the great state of New Jersey. My brother lives in New Jersey. My son went to college in New Jersey. I'm sure it's a lovely place. But that's how we ended up in San Francisco. But before we get to San Francisco, we are in New York. And we are spending the night, 1 night in New York before we fly out to San Francisco. So we're going to the airport. And because we are only allowed 1 suitcase per person, we're all wearing all of our clothes, like multiple layers of our clothes. Now, we're lucky that it's January. Can you imagine the people leaving in July who had to wear all of their clothes because they weren't allowed that many suitcases? So we're at the airport. Now, I don't know if any of you have children or grandchildren who were ever really attached to an item. You know, for some kids, it's a blankie. For some kids, it's a doll. For me, it was a black bear that was called Misha, which is the Russian word for bear. I was not a very creative child. I got more creative later on in my life. And this bear had been with me through Poland, through Austria, through Rome, through America. It was like my one consistent thing. And then we're at the airport and we're getting ready to go. And the teddy bear is missing. Okay, now I'm 7 years old. It's my one comfort item. And the teddy bear is missing. Now, you have to understand, we're not even legally in the United States at the time, because our papers say we are legally going to San Francisco. New York is just a stopover. We are not allowed to leave the airport. But the teddy bear is missing. Now, I need to explain to you something about my father. My father is a very practical man. My father is a very rational man. My father is a man who makes decisions based on logic, not on emotion. But the teddy bear is missing. So my father sneaks away from the group, gets into a cab. Keep in mind, at this point, we literally have $100 per person, and that's it, because that's the maximum amount of money you're allowed to take out of the Soviet Union. Gets in a cab, takes it back to the hotel, speaks to the concierge. The concierge says, the maid cleaned the room. I don't know if any of you know how cleaning works in a hotel, but it is a nonstop process. The minute somebody checks out, they grab everything, they have to clean it. It's not, they have industrial washers in the basement. It is a very intense process. My father says, let me speak to the maid. They bring out the maid says, I cleaned the room. I didn't find it, editor. My father says, take me to where you dump the sheets. They usually have these long chutes to go down to the basement. So she takes him there. He climbs into where the sheets are, digs around, finds the teddy bear, gets back into a cab, comes back to the airport in time for us to make it to San Francisco. So, you know, when people ask me about the immigration experience, you know, I can tell you about the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. I can tell you about wheat. I can tell you about the paperwork you have to find in Vienna and Rome. But the fact is, when you ask me about the immigrant experience, it comes down to the teddy bear was missing, and then the teddy bear was found. So we arrived in San Francisco, and I was put in a Jewish day school, which is really convenient because I didn't speak English or Hebrew, so it didn't really matter. Well, okay, actually, you know what? That's not true. I knew 2 words of English. The first word was apple, because it was, you know, you have a picture book with the alphabet and it usually says apple. And the other English word I knew was the. How do you translate the word the to someone who speaks a language that has no articles in it? So that was what I went to school with. And I learned lots and lots of fascinating things about going to school in America. Did you know that in America, you're not supposed to wear the same thing to school every day? I didn't know that. I had one dress. It was fabulous. It was red and it had fruit along the bottom. And my mother said what was really great about it is that it was synthetic. So you could wash it out at night, put it on the radiator to dry the next morning, and then you could wear it. But in America, you're not supposed to wear the same thing every day to school. I didn't know that. Did you know that? Did you know that in America, when little girls go swimming, they're not just supposed to wear underpants? They're supposed to wear something on top? I didn't know that. Did you know there is in America a holiday that, as my grandmother describes, what's that holiday when they go door to door begging for food? Halloween. Halloween. You got it. It's Halloween. Didn't know about that either. Also, did you know that in America, when you get a cut, you're not supposed to put green antiseptic on it? You're supposed to put a Band-Aid on it. I didn't know that. Did you know that in America, if you get a cold, you are not supposed to put your feet into boiling water and then get thick socks, put dried mustard in them, and then put your feet in those socks? I didn't know that. But the biggest thing I didn't know that I learned about in America is that if you had a chest cold, you are not supposed to do what's called banki. Let me describe banki to you. I want you to imagine the top of a light bulb, so that rounded glass part, but thicker. And then you take a wire and you wrap it in gauze or cotton, whatever you have, and you dip it in either rubbing alcohol or if you don't have anything else, drinking alcohol, and you set it on fire. And you put the fire underneath this top here to get the oxygen out. And then you put it on your back and it makes a very satisfying sucking sound. And you go 4x4 or 4x3 and you keep it there for about 20 minutes. The idea is it's supposed to increase circulation and help you fight off infection. Because in the Soviet Union, there was very little medication. So people had to use a lot of homeopathic stuff. And after about 20 minutes, you take it off and it makes a very satisfying sound. And it leaves a perfect brown bruise on your back. Did you know that in America, if you go to school and you have 20 perfectly round brown bruises on your back, people will have questions. Now, since then, I found out it's called cupping, and it's actually very big in the homeopathic community now. I can assure you it was not very big in the homeopathic community in 1977. So these were all the amazing things that I learned about coming to America. Eventually I learned English. I learned not to come to school with bruises on my back. And when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to be a writer. Now, what is the piece of advice that all writers are given? Does anyone know? Anyone know? Writers are told, write what you know. What did I know? I knew about being a Soviet Jewish immigrant. That was about it. So I wrote about that, and this was back in the day. I'm sure you all remember. Who remembers dot matrix printers? Dot matrix printers were the things where you went back and forth, and you had to rip the paper off the side, and then you had to stand and make sure that your paper didn't jam, because then you would kind of print your book all on one page. So I would be sending those out to publishers, because back then you had to also send a self-addressed stamped envelope so that you were paying them to reject you. And I would send those back and forth. And they would tell me, Russia doesn't sell, no one is interested. So I started writing other things. I wrote a series of figure skating murder mysteries. I wrote some romance novels. I used to work for two soap operas, As the World Turns and Guiding Light. So I wrote books that were connected to there. And then about 5 years ago, I was having lunch with my then agent, and she said to me, Russia is really hot right now. And I said, I can't imagine why. I can't imagine what's going on in the world that's making Russia hot right now. So I ended up writing a book that was set in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, in the 1970s, and in present-day Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. I don't know if you know Brighton Beach, Brooklyn is a very big Russian Jewish-speaking community. And the feedback that I got from readers was that they really enjoyed the 1930s section the most because, for obvious reasons, Western Europe gets most of the press about the 1930s and the 1940s, but what was going on in the Soviet Union under Stalin, I mean, if Hitler hadn't showed up, Stalin would have definitely held the record for killing the most number of people during that time period. He was killing his own people, in addition to everything else. So when I did my second book, which became My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish autonomous region, I set it primarily in the 1930s. And one of the story points in My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish autonomous region, was that Americans moved to the Soviet Union in the 1930s and 1940s. Now, to be fair, the 1930s there is a depression on. People don't have work, and the Soviet Union is saying, come, we have work for everyone. So it was a bit of a legitimate reason, but the feedback I got from readers was, I don't believe you. This is basically what they said to me. They said, I don't believe you. I don't believe Americans ever moved to the Soviet Union. And for the record, not only did Americans move to the Soviet Union, they had to pay for the privilege of moving because you had to pay a fee. So people would sell all their property in America and they would move to the city. So when I did my third and final book, which is the one that I'm here to talk about today, that's called Go On Pretending, I said it, and it begins with an American couple that moves to the Soviet Union. Now, the question becomes, why would an American couple move to the Soviet Union? So remember we talked about write what you know. So this is where I get to talk a little bit about me. So yes, I am a Jew from the former Soviet Union, but my husband is African American. And we've been together for almost 27 years now. We have 3 kids, 26, almost 22, and 18. And so it's something that we talked about. And one of the things that came up in conversation was what kind of couple would move to the Soviet Union? And we said, well, if it's the 1950s, what about an interracial couple? An interracial couple who sees what is going on in the United States, who has just, seen Emmett Till being lynched, who has seen what's going on. And then the Soviet Union invites them to, and this is one of my favorite historical details. In 1957, the Soviet Union threw a pro-democracy festival. Let us all take a moment to ponder the Soviet Union throwing a pro-democracy festival, a country where all elections had only one name on the ballot and people were required by law to come out and vote for them. You could be arrested for not coming and vote for the one person on the ballot. So the Soviet Union was throwing a pro-democracy festival. Now, it is 1957, and it is what is known as Khrushchev's fall. Because Stalin, the Joseph Stalin, who killed 30 million of his own people, not just during World War II. I mean, the Soviet Union's strategy during World War II was we have more men, we're just going to keep throwing men at the German army until we outnumber them. And that's basically what they did. But at the same time, he was still deporting people to Siberia and killing them by the hundreds of thousands. So Stalin dies in 1953, and Nikita Khrushchev comes to power. And he wants to show the world that the Soviet Union is all over. We're done with that Stalin thing. In fact, he even makes a speech at the 20th Communist Congress where he denounces Stalin and his cult of personality. And he says, we're not going to do that anymore. All those people we killed, well, sorry. For those we killed, we can't really do anything about that, but we're really good now and we're not going to do anything bad again. So come to the Soviet Union for this world democracy, pro-democracy festival. I don't know if you've ever heard the song Moscow Nights. That song came from the Democracy Festival. They had representatives there from people from all over the world. It was all about peace. They had American jazz musicians and French scientists, and it was just a huge world expo. So imagine this American couple who are engaged, but they live in New York, so they could get married in the United States in New York, but they couldn't in half of the country. Their marriage would need to be recognized in half of the country. And they come to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union throws out the red carpet for them because the Soviet Union only wants them to see what they have set up. They're telling them we've outlawed racism. We've outlawed sexism. We've outlawed anti-Semitism. All those things that you're suffering from in America, we don't have that here. So when I was creating these two characters, I thought this is a couple who would believe because they want to believe. And the reason the book is called Go On Pretending is it is very much about people seeing what they want to see and hearing what they want to hear and wanting so badly to believe that the Soviet Union has gotten rid of racism and sexism and anti-Semitism, that they leave the United States and they resettle in Moscow, where of course they're huge celebrities, so they never really see what's going on in the world. The same way that when Paul Robeson visited the Soviet Union and accepted the Stalin peace prize, and people asked him about all the people that Stalin was killing, and his response was, well, I haven't seen that. Well, of course he didn't see that. He wasn't allowed to see that. And this is the same sort of thing, but they do have a daughter, Emma, and because Emma is a native speaker of Russian, she hears the things that people say about them because despite the Soviet Union's claiming that they have outlawed racism, they did not. And so their daughter hears all the things that her parents either don't hear or would rather not hear. So we see what it's like for her growing up in the Soviet Union in the 60s and the 70s. And then she marries a man who's very much an opportunist in the sense that he's risen up the political Soviet ladder, and then they move to the United States so he can be a representative of the Soviet government there. And then they see the United States through their eyes. And finally, in the third section of the book, their daughter, Libby, who has heard all these stories about her grandmother, who before she moved to the Soviet Union had fought in the Spanish Civil War. And so she's this very romantic revolutionary figure to her. So she takes off to a place that I did not know existed. It was actually one of my own kids who told me about it. In Syria, there is a region called Rojava. It is an autonomous region, well, it's trying to be an autonomous region in Syria, where they're calling it the Women's Revolution of Rojava. Basically, there are units of women, armed military women, who are fighting off ISIS. For the last 20 years, they have been able to keep ISIS at bay with these women military units. So that's where the granddaughter, Libby, goes. And of course, her mother is absolutely not having it. So she's like, my kid is 19. She does not get to go off and play revolutionary in Syria. So, and she says to her mother, who at this point is 91 years old, she says to her, she went to Rojava because of you. Now you have to bring her back. So these two women, the 91-year-old Rose, who's the one who originally moved to the Soviet Union, and her 40-something daughter, Emma, they head off to the southern part of Syria to get her 19-year-old daughter to come back and not play revolutionary. And the final thing that I'm going to say before I open the floor to questions is the title. It's called Go On Pretending. It's actually from a song from a musical called Chess, which is coming back to Broadway completely coincidentally. And it's all about the fact that everyone is looking for utopia. Everyone is looking for a place where they can be, where they think the world will be perfect. And when they find a place that promises them to be perfect, they will ignore all evidence that it isn't what it's claiming to be. And we're all, the fact is we all see what we want to see and hear what we want to hear. So the theme is very much all these very different women in very different times and very different places looking for a perfect place to belong and sort of trying to mold it to their own expectations rather than seeing it the reality. So that is the story of the book. I would love to answer any questions that people have. Otherwise, as you can tell, I'm a big talker. I can just sort of keep talking. So, does anyone have any questions, or should I just keep telling more delightful stories? Like I can tell a story that we went in 2019 because my oldest son was doing an internship in Moscow, And so my husband and our two younger kids decided to visit him there, and we got super lucky in 2019, because not only did we get in just under the wire before COVID, but I'm certainly not going back to Russia now. So we visited him, and remember how they outlawed, racism? Well, before we got there, as my son said to my husband, make sure you're always wearing a suit, because if you're not, they think you're an African laborer here to steal their jobs, and they might jump you and beat you up. So while Russia and the Soviet Union have outlawed all racism, at least that was our experience in 2019. So does anyone have anything they want to say to me? Ask me. As I said, otherwise I threaten to just keep on talking. I don't know, Barbara, if you want to come out, say hi. And okay, she's right back there. So hello. Yes. So anyone want to chat with me about anything? Because as you can see, I'm very entertaining.
I'm enjoying it.
Okay. I mean, I can read some from the book. I don't know what people would like to do.
I'd love to hear something. Anybody here online? Hi, Maya.
All right, so here's what I'll do. I'll read you something. Okay, give me a second.
Is your book in paperback?
It is. It is available in paperback and it's an e-copy. This is just a hardback because it stands up. That's the only reason I brought it here, but yes, it's even available, and the ebook is on sale now for only $1.99. So that's me doing the selling. Okay. So before we get to the Soviet Union,
Oh,
we're actually,
somebody has a question.
Oh, really?
Could the author talk a bit about writing her books and getting them published?
okay, that's what I'm gonna, let me read the section and then I will absolutely answer that. So, this is the setting. I gotta give you a little bit of a setting. How many of you have ever seen or heard of the soap opera Guiding Light? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, cool. So before the Guiding Light was on television, it was actually on the radio. And the scene that I want to read to you today is actually from before they get to the Soviet Union. It's from when Rose, who is our heroine, she is a producer on the Guiding Light, on the radio show. And she hires an actor just over the phone because it's radio, so all she needs to do is hear their voice. And when he arrives, she's very surprised to find out that he's an African-American actor. And now she is going to take him to the set and see how the other actors are reacting. She led him into the soundproof studio, a plate of glass separating the actors from the production staff. A dual keyboard organ stood at the far left corner. Rosaria, who played it daily for each intro, outro, and dramatic pause in between, setting up her sheet music. The sound effects bench was on the left, featuring every tool necessary to make doorbells ring, coffee pots pour, cards shuffle, trains chug, brooks babble, and fists fly. To the right of the organ hung 3 microphones, a CBS logo engraved along the bottom from 3 separate poles dropping from the ceiling. Each setup could accommodate up to 5 actors. Leads with the most dialogue would gather in groups of 2 or 3 around the first 2 mics, while those covering smaller parts rotated around the remainder. They stood on mats to muffle the sound of shoes on studio floor concrete. They held scripts in their hands, dropping pages to the ground once done to avoid the rustle of turning. Though they wouldn't be seen, everyone reported formally dressed. Men in suits, women in dresses, skirts, blouses, hairstyled, wearing full makeup. They were professionals, no different from theater or movie performers, though they didn't engender a fraction of their respect or their salaries. They were just selling soap to housewives, no less. Good morning, Rose addressed her cast, the various members of the Guiding Light's Bauer family, from the patriarch known as Papa to the actors playing his children, their assorted love interests, friends, and nemesis. Faces swiveled in her direction, including the director and audio technician. When Erna was in Chicago, Rose was the established authority. This is Mr. Jonas Kane. He will be assuming the role of Edmund Bard. If the expressions Rose was seeing came close to what must have splashed across her features when she spied Jonas, any hope she harbored of coming off as unflustered skipped out the window. Recalling his resume, which she surely hadn't been reading obsessively since the audition, Rose enlightened, Mr. Kane is a graduate of Columbia University, English major, and a veteran. Even 6 years after the war's end, a former soldier still garnered some respect. Where did you serve, Mr. Kane? In the European theater, he answered cautiously, not nearly as pleased with Rose's line of questioning as she was. The Battle of the Bulge. A snort from the back of the room, an actor Rose wasn't familiar with. She didn't bother with casting the smaller under five line roles. Raised his chin to draw. I was at the Bulge. There were no colored soldiers at the Bulge. You're a liar, boy. With all due respect, sir, Jonas emphasized the final word, setting an example of how one should address a fellow man. My 761st Tank Battalion broke through the German lines in Calais, so the rest of you could come strolling in after. One of our tankers, Private Ernest Jenkins, received the Silver Star from General George Patton himself for our efforts. Crowd bastards got a pounding they won't soon forget from the Harlem Hellfighters. Rose was about to step in to shield Theo Goetz, who played Papa Bauer. He was a Jew born in Vienna, Austria, a proud naturalized American. But Jonas' crowd slur could still prove offensive to him when the unnamed actor countered, Eleanor's niggers is more like it. Mrs. Roosevelt's outspoken efforts to end Jim Crow laws and integrate the military, all of which came to a head when she was photographed personally handing out refreshments inside Washington's D.C.'s first mixed canteen amongst Negro servicemen and white hostesses, earned all colored soldiers the meaning of insult. Rose was about to chastise the use of the epithet crowd, but now she stood frozen in the face of an even worse slander. There was no question it was up to her. Rose was the established authority, except she had no idea what to say. They had a half hour until today's episode went live on the air. They had time for only one rehearsal. In theory, Rose could replace any performer at any time. She could fire the under five actor and shift his lines to someone else. She could rewrite the script so that another character said them. She could cut them all together. She could also hand off the role of Edmund to another actor, either just for today and then begin the casting process all over again, or for the long term. It was Edmund's first appearance. Nobody would know that he didn't sound the way Rose had fantasized him sounding. Yet Edmund was scheduled to be a major player for months. He was critical to the long story. The judicious thing to do was to get rid of the less silent actor and make it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated on the Guiding Light set. Now they only had 27 minutes until today's episode went live on the air. Rose didn't want to waste the time it would take to exercise one actor, then rearrange the whole episode to gloss over his absence. At least that's what she would say if asked. She knew nobody would ask. Just like she knew the real reason Rosen didn't want to fire the actor who challenged Jonas was because she didn't know how many of his colleagues felt the same way. And Rose couldn't risk a mutiny, not 25 minutes now before airtime. The cast was looking to her. Jonas's gaze was the only one that felt like a weight pressing down on her breastbone, making it difficult for Rose to breathe. His face reposed absolutely neutral. Why then did Rose feel like he was tracking every thought? I leave you to your rehearsal. Rose handed off her authority to the director, slinking out of the studio a great deal less confident than she'd originally come in. So to answer the question about how I wrote the book and got it published, so I have been writing for a really long time. My first book was published in 1995, and the world was a very different place in 1995. Publishing was a very different world in 1995. There were lots more houses, but there were also fewer options for people if they wanted to do it themselves. Basically, you either were published by a major publisher or you weren't. And so my first books were published by Avon. Then I had some books published by Dell. I worked at Berkeley. I worked at HarperCollins. I worked at Simon and Schuster. And I went through the process of different publishing houses. I had different agents. It's very much a business of what have you done for me lately? Basically, I have had 2 New York Times bestsellers, okay? I've written 2 New York Times bestsellers, and every time it's still, you're selling yourself, you're selling your product to publishers, and publishing is very, very different now. There are many fewer houses. I don't know if you noticed, big corporations keep buying other corporations. So where there used to be at least like 30 publishers, now they just call the big five. And a couple of other smaller ones like Random House merged with Penguin Putnam. We were really hoping they would call themselves Random Penguin, but they did that. That was a more fun name. So to answer the question is, in order to get a book published, I'm at the stage now where I don't have to write the whole book. I can just write a proposal, which usually includes 3 chapters and a detailed outline. And then you have to get an agent who thinks that they can sell your book. Basically, an agent's motivation is they think they can make money from selling your book, because an agent gets a cut of whatever you get from the publisher. The agent gets a cut of that. So you get an agent who believes enough in your book, but that's just the first step. You can submit to like 30 agents and not find someone. I've gone through at least 5 agents at this point with different books and different types of books. And then getting the agent is just the very first step. Then you have to submit to all the various publishers. And then you have to see if they will go for it. As I said, I've worked with a lot of big publishers. The last one I worked is what's called a micro publisher. And that means they're very small and they focus on something very particular. So this publisher is actually called History Through Fiction. And what he does is he tells history stories through fiction. And one of the things you get in the back of these books is there's actually details on where you can read more about the subject. It's not a bibliography. Bibliography is boring. A bibliography is just a straight list of books, but it's details about, for instance, here's the thing. If anyone ever asks you, do you want to release a book during the pandemic? No, not really. But if you're writing a book during a pandemic, you have a lot of free time. And you can really research and you can go down the rabbit hole that is YouTube. And I found like old movies from the period and interviews with people and film of the World Youth Festival, the Pro-Democracy Festival. So I explain all that if people want to learn more about any of the topics that are covered in my book, whether it's radio soap operas or the World Youth Festival or the Women's Revolution in Rojava. I have all of that. And this publisher is a very good fit for what I'm doing, because my books are very much about telling historical stories through a fictional lens. Does that answer the question? The person who asked it, was that you, Maya? Yeah, it wasn't you? Okay, maybe it was someone else. So I hope that answered the question. Are there any other questions that people have? Again,
Let me see, I think I see something
Oh, do you?
online. Let's see, another question here.
Yeah, I think it was Margaret.
Oh, okay, you're good, yes.
So I hope who asked the question got the answer to the question. Okay. All right, so this is your event. I'm just here to say hi. I mean, I walked up 273 stairs. I'm happy here. I'm happy to be inside where it's air conditioned and I'm not outside in the heat on the stairs. So I can stay here indefinitely, but I also don't want to bore you. So if anyone has any other questions, I can answer them.
What's your current process feel about it?
That's a really good question. Oh, sorry. I said, what's my feeling about how Russians today feel about interracial marriages? Was that your question? Great. My parents were actually great, if I may. Although, to be fair, my husband and I we didn't really ask them a question. We kind of presented it as a fait accompli. Here we are, we're getting married. Okay. They didn't really get a vote. But, it's not great. We hear things, I hear things. As I said, yeah, I mentioned the Brighton Beach community. My parents live there now, so my husband and I walk around that area. We sometimes hear things, but we don't care. So here's, if I may, my husband and I have decided to be really, really self-absorbed. That's one of our tips to a good marriage. If you're really, really self-absorbed, you don't care what anybody else thinks. And that's kind of how we go about it. But the short answer is they're not thrilled. The longer answer is they're not thrilled, and I don't care.
Russians versus Americans.
It's difficult to say. Americans say things too. We periodically get yelled at. I would say here's the thing, it's not fair to compare because my sample set of Americans is much, much larger than my sample set of Russian speakers. So I can't really compare. Honestly, nobody cares at this point. We're just like, if people care, it's kind of their problem, not my problem. So, yeah, but thank you for asking. But as you can see, I have a very strong ego. My husband also has a very strong ego. So we're like, obviously, we're the most wonderful people ever. How could anyone ever be against us? So although when my son, when our oldest son was in Moscow, he heard things too. So that's why I said, that's why he gave us all sorts of tips. Well, thank you, thank you. So, as I said, don't want to bore folks, I've been here for an hour now, and that's usually enough to hear from me. If anybody would like to talk about yourself, amongst yourselves, about yourselves, I can do that too. I'm very open. Sorry? Oh, thank you so much, that's very kind of you to say. So I was gonna say, Barbara, about Religious Spirit, I said, I think we're good, so we can, turn off the recording, so people then just don't have a recording of me sitting and babbling. Not that I don't have multiple recordings of me just sitting around and babbling. If you go to my website, actually, my website is alinaadams.com, and you enjoy hearing me babbling, there's videos of that too. The books are available anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You buy straight from the publisher. Actually, you should check out the publisher. It's called History Through Fiction. And most of the stories are historical fiction. So if that's the sort of thing you like, we've got that. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for those who came online. And I really appreciated meeting all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.